I'm here to discuss about Oromo issues with Dr. Tsegaye Ararssa today. Tsegaye Ararssa is here to introduce himself.
Thank you, Ali. It's always a pleasure to be part of this conversation on the issues that matter to us, to our people, and to our nation. As you indicated, my name is Tsegaye Ararssa. I am a lawyer by training and a legal academic by profession. I teach law. I specialize in the area of constitutional law. I just completed a PhD study at the University of Melbourne on presenting absence, the figure of the Oromo in the constitution of Ethiopia. What I try to do in there is to describe the invisibility, the absence of the Oromo and their subjectivity in the juridical texts of the constitutions of Ethiopia by looking at the three major constitutional moments, namely 1931 and 1955, the imperial constitutions, 1974 and 1987, the Socialist People's Democratic Republic Constitution, and 1995, the Federal Democratic Constitution. Of course, before that there is a 1991 Charter. So these ensembles of constitutional texts are put together as the imperial, the socialist, and the federal devolutionist constitutional moments. Now, I try to trace and locate the Oromo, their image, their narrative, and their personality, their conceptions in law, as they figure in the legal texts of Ethiopia, as well as in the dynamics of the making, unmaking, and potential remaking of Ethiopia as a polity.
You were a lecturer at Tsegaye University for about 15 years?
Yes, I forgot to mention that although I started out as a public prosecutor in the mid-1990s, I quickly moved on to be an academic. I started teaching first actually at the Civil Service University. I was only 21 back then, as a young man who's passionate about teaching. And then I moved on to teach at the University of Addis Ababa, and then I served as visiting professor of African law and legal pluralism in the University of Trento in Italy, and I gave some lectures in Ghent, Belgium. I also worked as the UNDP Governance and Human Rights Advisor in 2010 and 2011 for a brief while. But I think my major calling is, and my vocation is teaching. I sometimes pontificate and say that teaching is my act of worship.
Very interesting. You actually raised about figure and the visibility of Oromo through your legal study, lecture, and working as a lawyer. What is the visibility of Oromo?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Ali. One of the things that I do in this thesis that I just completed is trying to understand the relationship of the Oromo to the Ethiopian law, the relationship of the Oromo to law in general, both international and domestic constitution. By looking at the Oromo within the context of the Ethiopian constitution, what I'm trying to do is, how did the Oromo relate to the modern Ethiopian state and to the modern Ethiopian state law that came into existence soon after the incorporation of the Oromos into the empire in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Now, it's a very interesting time that the Oromo was incorporated, the Oromo territory was incorporated into the Ethiopian modern state. That was between 1885, 1886 and 1902. Now, that time is also coincidental to the Berlin Conference in Europe, the era of colonial scramble for Africa. It was also a time that coincides with the colonial international law, the emergence and growth of colonial international law everywhere, the time when Europe took upon itself to civilize the whole world, particularly the world that is not Christian, that was considered then as uncivilized. So Ethiopia, soon after its birth as a modern state, wanted to modernize its laws, and the first written constitution was adopted in 1931. I always say that the modern Ethiopian state is created by the operation of two simultaneous kinds of laws: colonial international law from outside and domestic imperial constitutional law from inside. The colonial international law that was in place was the one that Ethiopians, the old Abyssinian state, the old Abyssinian core, with the newly incorporated territories, negotiated with the colonial powers of the time, namely Britain, in Kenya, in the Sudan, Italy, in Eritrea, and France, which was back then in what is called French Somaliland, which is now Djibouti. And these were the colonial powers that were surrounding the area. So the boundaries were carved through negotiations and colonial international treaties of the time between 1896 and 1902. So the country was formed by international law before it was actually domestically formed by domestic laws. So once the territory was marked out, the territory of the Ethiopian polity, the Ethiopian state, is marked out as a realm of what Europe could understand as a sovereign independent nation. Then Ethiopia wanted to create a polity, a political community within that territory. And formation of a political community needed a modern state law. Because the state that inhabits the territory is modern, the law that shapes the inside, the soul of the nation, was supposed to be modern. So Ethiopia began to adopt different Western laws, written laws, in the 1930s. Part of the reason was Ethiopia wanted, as a modern civilized state, wanted to join the international community in the League of Nations. So in order to do that, they had to come up with a number of laws that will change the image of the country, unify the population, in other words, to integrate and assimilate all the other peoples, Markakis calls them the other peoples of Ethiopia, into the old Abyssinian core, and create one big, modern, civilized Ethiopian nation. So what I was trying to do was to trace the image of the Oromo, to locate this person, which is a latecomer to the empire, in their relationship vis-a-vis the law, vis-a-vis the constitution. Are they visible in the constitution? Do they have a subjectivity? Do they form part of the we the people that constitutions speak in terms of? Do they have sovereignty? Do they have autonomy? Are they recognized as bearers of rights and duties, or meaning citizens? Or are they just subjects having some privilege, some benefits based on the will and the whims and conjectures of the benevolent emperor? So that was the question I was trying to look at. Now, one of the things that I discovered in a closer reading of the law is that mostly the law marginalizes the Oromo through silence. Theoretically, therefore, one of the questions I was dealing with was, how do we listen to the silence of the law? The silence of the law is not necessarily innocent. It might be exclusive, it might be marginalizing, it might make you absent while you are present. One of the claims I make in my thesis is that the Oromo is present in the territory but absent in the polity. And one of my tasks, therefore, is to present absent objects. So one of the things I saw is that the Ethiopian laws are silent about the Oromo. The other thing they do is they mention them as the pagan other. For example, in Christian Ethiopia, which it was, Ethiopia had its own self-image for centuries, especially in the modern, when it was formed as a modern state. One of the things that the images it wanted to project to the outside world was that it is a Christian empire. It was historically the land of the the pilot, a land that is civilized. So in order to be civilized, understood as civilized back then, you need to understood as Christian. So in fact, there is this old story that Ethiopia is an island of Christianity, surrounded by pagans, Muslims, Ararssa, Israel, and so on and so forth. So the Oromo was referred to as the other that inhabits the margins of Ethiopian polity, which means the Oromo person is the pagan other in a Christian empire. This figure changes across time, and so through silence they make them absent, through reference to them as the pagan other. If the empire is quintessentially Christian, then the Oromo and all the other people, the other people, are expected to be something other than Christian. So they were supposed to be pagan, or Muslim, or the Jews, the Ethiopian Jews called Bet Israel, but pejorative people, the Falasha. Now, so during the imperial times, during those imperial constitutions, the Oromo features as the pagan other, the Aramene, according to the words of the preamble written by the draftsperson, often referred to as the Aramene. The other thing the law does is to give you a particularly negative name. One of the issues I deal with is the naming issue, the labeling issue, the power of definition. How do the Oromo consider themselves, and how does Ethiopia consider them? Starting from the name Galla was ascribed to the Oromo. The Oromo never knew that name. And they did a genealogy to it, but he actually referred to the name Galla and did an analysis saying that it must have come from the land, from the river, and the Oromo people must have come from it. Al-Qataye, in his later book, The History of the Oromo in the 19th century, he also suggested that there are people who came over from other places. So one of the things the law does is to otherize you by telling you that your name indicates something else, barbaric, barbarity and so on, that you came from somewhere else, that you're not from here, that you are alien. So in fact, when the foundational text that talks about the encounter between the Oromo and the Ethiopian Empire was the Bahari book. Abba Bahari, a monk who wrote the story of the encounter between the Oromo and the Empire in the 16th century, in his book in 1593, he actually looks at the Oromo and talks about a flood of hordes that's invading the country. And that story of expansion is inflected to being seen as a story of migration. And now, as you know, in contemporary language, when you say someone is a migrant, that automatically leaves you on the margins of society. So one of the things the law did in Ethiopia was to marginalize a specific category of people by referring to them as latecomers, migrants, invaders that are intruding into, encroaching upon the territory of the Christian Empire. The other thing the law does is by literally effecting discrimination on you and suppressing you, economically exploiting your territory, and extracting the resources and subjecting the people to cultural domination and imperial political domination. So if you look at the constitution, is an ensemble of different rules, especially during Haile Selassie's time. One of the things that you see is that the Oromo voice, the Oromo language, the Oromo culture, the Oromo identity, etc. was completely erased through different kinds of legislations. So law, through its silences, through its elisions, through its erasure, through its negative pejorations, through sanctioning a distorted history or historiography, through those mechanisms, it otherizes a population. And the Oromo happen to be one of the others against which the Ethiopian Empire was defined. Now, having said that, in my own lifetime, you asked me about how the Oromo figured in my experience as a lecturer in the university. It's obvious that many Oromos weren't privileged enough to get higher education until the 1960s, late 1960s. Very few people went to the law school even in those days. Madda Walaabuu, Tsegaye, you can name them. I can count them. You can mention people like Baro Tunsa, who did law only after he studied pharmacy first. Very few Oromos actually went to law school. Very strange. And someone recently was saying, I think it was Ethiopia, who was saying that it was impossible for Oromos to join the law school as a first degree. So they had to do something else and come back. Mamu Mazemu was a military person. Bulcha was already a big economist and minister. This high official. All these people come through the other way, through the back door, as it is, as it were. So the laws, they weren't present in the life of the law. There are two things that happened when Ethiopia's modern state law described law. One of the things it did was it glorified its imported laws, imperial laws, but also undermined the laws of the people by referring to them as customary laws or traditional laws. And this is usual in all other colonial countries as well. So the Oromo law was discounted as a non-law, as a social practice, as a traditional practice. So the Oromo is alienated from its own law because its own law is customary. The Oromo is not integrated into the life of the law in the mainstream because they are not getting into the mainstream enough. So until the 1970s, in fact, it's ironic that Guru Chama, who was this Baro Tumsa's Tinsa Lepisa Gabajober's thesis and Baro's thesis were written right at the beginning, at the time when the revolution was about to come, 1973 and 1974. So up until that time, there were many Oromos in the law schools, therefore in the life of the people. After that, a stream of Oromos began to join universities massively because of the operationalization of the basic literacy campaigns of the Derg, massification of education in general to everywhere, including the Oromo, and many people started to come into the law school. In my times, when I was teaching law, there were many more Oromos than there were in my own time as a student. And over time, they started to come together, congregate, and try to articulate Oromo issues every time there is some big legal decision that's being made in the heartland of the empire, which is, for example, moving the capital of Oromia from Bulgaria to Madda, or a forest is burning and they want to say the environment has to be protected and government's responsibility to be looked at seriously, and so on and so forth. But even then, they are still a minority. Whenever there is a riot, whenever there is a movement, they are easy prey because the government tracks them. The other students point fingers at them and they trace them and they take them away to the place of detention and torture. So my life, my experience so far shows to me that the Oromo is generally either invisible or on the margins of the life of the law in our country.
That's very interesting. The government used different tools of technology to sustain our life. One of some things actually used is court, police, intelligence, media, and many more to actually sustain this life. What the population, especially the Oromo, chance to actually live meaningful life if the government owns every essential tool in the country?
That's a very important question. The state has ways of improving education. All states, not just particular to Ethiopia. all states want to impose some kind of, they want to generate some kind of legitimacy. The best way to generate legitimacy is effectiveness in governance. You deliver public goods and services such as roads, infrastructure, schools, clinics, bridges, and so on and so on. Effective governance, effective peace and order, security. That's one way of trying to get acceptability, trying to generate their own legitimacy. The second thing they do is coercion. They use forces, security forces such as the military, the intelligence sector, the law enforcement sector, in order to ensure that their power is enforced. The third is what I call the soft power, the ideological and the intellectual power, which is usually expressed through the media, the educational institutions, the academic institutions, the church, because it generates some ideology of acceptability, some ideology of legitimacy. So when a state is founded on violence, like the modern Ethiopian state, its foundation is violent. Its foundational moment is a violent moment because it was established through conquest, through abusive colonial international law. The borders are framed by colonial international law. The inside was occupied by violent means, through conquest, enslavement, displacement, and dislocation of people. A lot of genocidal moves and so on and so forth. When the beginning is so violent, it is obviously, it has an originally, if you like, legitimacy problem. When they have this kind of legitimacy issue, one of the things they do, what happens is they become insecure in the face of the society. Because the society they conquered will only wait for the moment when they fight back. So as a result, this is a very insecure kind of state, and this has happened everywhere in Africa, wherever there is colonial experience. Post-colonial states are insecure states. The first thing they do, therefore, is securitize identities that militate against the state. Number one, it's a safe all sorts of things. And number two, they use all sorts of governmental institutions to suppress dissent. What are those institutions? They were meant to be governing, but they will be used for rule. Rule is more hegemonic. Governance is that law, yes, is a technology of governance. To govern means to administer, to provide goods and services, to deliver. But to rule is to just put everyone in place. All right? To do a top-down arrangement and rearrangement of life and order in society. So what do they do? One of the things they do is they really own the law. Meaning, the lawmaker, the law interpreter, and the law enforcer become the ownership, under the ownership, the tool of the state, the tool of the government, to, instead of governing, to actually rule and control the society. So these legal institutions, media institutions, law, intelligence and military institutions, all of them will be used to control the society, to serve them by generating goods and services. The primary issue is security, meaning the security of the state. In order to protect and preserve that security of the state, instead of using laws and so on and so forth, they protect the security of the state from whom? From, of course, the society. Because the society and the state have a violent relationship, or inaugural. And that has to be redeemed through civilized politics like constitutional rule, democracy, election, protection of human rights and so on. So that will happen. As a result, these institutions of hegemony like law, courts, media will be under serious control in third world countries. If you have seen the patterns in Ethiopia. One of the problems with us is that the court is not independent. The Constitutional Inquiry Council is not independent. The human rights institutions like the Ombudsman are not independent. The media is not independent, because an independent media means an institution that exploits the cleavage between the state and the society. So once that space is manipulated, occupied by the people, if the media is occupied by the people, then what is the state left with? So they naturally control these institutions, and the society, of course, become an oppressed society. And we talk about the death of democracy in those kinds of societies.
So, master plan, you write a piece about master plan. Why people have to resist master plan? I mean, you actually give a legal reason why people have to resist master plan. Can you go through that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting article I wrote in 2014, basically because I was angry. It wasn't an academic piece. I was angry at the crisis that came about after the revelation by the government of the master plan that it prepared for integrating the surrounding towns, the towns that are in the neighborhood of the capital city, which in Ethiopia is called internationally known as Addis Ababa. When that was revealed in 2014, there was this televised discussion among the people who prepared the master plan from Addis Ababa, and the people who were meant to implement the master plan in those newly to be acquired parts of Oromia, these parts which were meant to be included in the city. And so I wrote it then, and one of the things I said is this master plan is simply unconstitutional, and I used the government's own constitution to see how it is against the constitution, and therefore on legal grounds that master plan shouldn't be implemented. One of the things that the master plan does is to integrate 17 waradas, districts, and 36 towns that are in the neighborhood of Addis Ababa, which are under the jurisdiction of the Oromia government, to be included in what they call integrated development plan of the city of Addis Ababa. That obviously brought tension. The reason it brought up tension was because these waradas, Ethiopia is a multinational federation. In fact, rhetorically speaking, it's a multi-foundational, multinational, multicultural republic, federal republic. As a federation, it has got 9 constituent units. They are called states. Oromia is one of them. And there are 2 city administrations, self-governing, autonomous city administration. One is Addis Ababa, which is recognized by the constitution under Article 49. The other is Diredawa, which is actually a city that is within Oromia, but because there are people who live in the city who are not Oromos, like a huge contingent of the Amhara and other peoples, a contingent of the Somali, trickling from the Shinile zone of the Somali region. Because of that, and because it is lucrative in terms of economic activities, the federal government illegally made the Diredawa city a chartered city and alienated it from the jurisdiction of Oromia. So there were 9 constituent units, states, and 2 city administrations. Now, Addis Ababa, therefore, was governed by its own charter, and its master plan was renewed every 10 years, like all other cities. Now, when this new one is going to come, what they wanted to do was to incorporate all the 16 waradas, districts, and 37 cities, towns into the region. One of the things we said is that is basically excision to excise, to cut out, to carve out what actually belongs to Oromia to be included in the autonomous self-governing city of Addis Ababa. And that is a changing of the boundaries of the states without doing a constitutional amendment. So we said this is unconstitutional. Number 2, a master plan should be something they back off, and then they say, look, this is a city council decision. The Oromia towns make their master plan. We are only integrating and coordinating the two. But that wasn't what's happening. They were basically taking over the administration of these towns. The interest is to have more land to give out to the rich folks, to the investments who are clients of the Ethiopian government, actually, and its own business clients. And the Oromia government resented that. Even the OPDO, the party that is forming the coalition of the ruling EPRDF, resisted that. And when that happened, the federal government was angry. And so we said, this master plan, it changed the jurisdictional and the territorial boundary of the states, and therefore it is unconstitutional because it is changing the boundaries without any constitutional amendment. The second thing we said is that it completely undoes the self-rule principle in federalism. Federalism, when we say federalism, we are talking about self-rule, the principles of self-rule and shared rule. Now, the Oromia region, who is supposed to draw up its own master plan for its towns, is deprived of its right to do so, and its state power, state autonomy, is completely taken away. The third thing is that it even disowns Oromos. It cancels and undermines the Oromo ownership of the city of Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa is an Oromo city. Addis Ababa is the capital city of Oromia. Although for years Oromos have lived in the city, the Oromo officials have lived in the city as guests, where they are actually hosts. And there is that resentment too. And Addis Ababa had a special interest, Oromia had a special interest over Addis Ababa according to Article 49 of the Constitution. That special interest issue, the special interest was legally unarticulated, and the Oromia government demanded the articulation of that issue, and it has been rejected several times. Now, when this master plan came into existence and wanted to take all the surrounding neighborhoods to be part of Addis Ababa, one of the things it does is that it liquidates and eliminates the special interest of Oromia in the city. That was also in the Constitution. They were demanding more, the Oromo were demanding more, and the state was actually taking even more. So, what happened? The people resented it. But before that, there was another reason why we resisted the master plan constitutionally speaking. The third reason was it violates the human rights of Oromo farmers. The means of the right to livelihood, Article 41. The right to socio-economic rights, the right to adequate living standards, the right to housing, the right to access to land, and all those things. They have been deprived. They have been deprived of the cultural rights, the right of Oromos living in those areas. Once they are incorporated, they will be forced to relinquish the services that they used to get in Afan Oromo, and they are going to get it in Amharic, which is the working language of the city and the federal government. So the rights of the Oromos were now going to be violated, and therefore that is unconstitutional. That makes the master plan unconstitutional. And then we also talked about the need for the Ethiopian government to be transparent and accountable in the development planning process. And in this case, it was a top-down activity, and they weren't consulted, they weren't participants, they weren't compensated properly, and therefore this is simply unconstitutional. It seems to be catching up with them even today. Every time they resist, they resist the resistance, they keep thinking about those constitutional issues. So we resisted it, and we said, once legally it is foundationless, meaning it's legally indefensible, then the citizens have the right to resist it through different other political mechanisms, including riots and rebellion and so on, and that's what we are seeking.
So the students and in some places families also part of the protest last year in the history as well, and there is a lot of assassination,
yes,
arrests, expelling people from the countries and universities from work. What this process will achieve, what do you think will happen if this process continues?
Well, it is very interesting that the protest has actually unleashed, the resistance to the master plan has unleashed quite a number of other issues onto the scene. Many misgivings that have been held, many disaffections that have been contained before in different ways have come out. When the students came out to protest against it in demonstrations last year, one of the mottos, the slogans they were making was that the special interests should be respected. It's not just stop the master plan. It's not just the farmers should not be displaced and dislocated. It was also a demand for the respect of the special interest of the Oromia government in the city. And secondly, they raised the issue of language, that the single largest population in the country is Oromo. And Afan Oromo is not a federal working language. A language that is less spoken by less people in the country. Amharic is the working language of the federal government. And there have been this demand for Afan Oromo to become a working language of the federal government. And the students raised that, using the occasion to protest the master plan. A number of issues have been there. As you know, over the years, as I said, in Imperial Ethiopia, Oromo was the savage other, the pagan other, the barbaric other. During the socialist regime, it was the primitive other, the backward other, waiting to be developed. And so in one of my writings I say the progressives meet the primitive, the socialists meet the backward. In the federal times, in these new times when Ethiopia is a neoliberal global actor, which is part of the G8 and so on and so forth, the Oromo became the anomalous terrorist, the irritant, the ethno-nationalist, the tribal. That's the image we have. So there is globalized Ethiopia, there is the terrorist Oromo. There is a cosmopolitan Ethiopia, there is a tribalist, ethno-nationalist Oromo, the irritant. There is the universalist Ethiopia, and there is a particularist Oromo. So these were the images. So for ages now, since 1995, especially after the departure of the OLF from the government in 1992, the Oromo, in different names, was a terrorist. You might use the name anti-peace forces, anti-development forces, and recently because of the issuance of the 2009 anti-terrorist legislation, because Ethiopia is a strategic ally of the Western world, the Oromo is a terrorist, and OLF is a terrorist organization, ONLF is a terrorist organization, all National Liberation Fronts are terrorist organizations. The Oromo people, if you want to silence an Oromo person in Ethiopia today, you just say, he's a sympathizer of OLF. So because of this rhetorical deployment of the terrorist image, the Oromo people are cowed down. But that doesn't mean they are comfortable. There was a simmering pain in that country. And when this master plan came, it came to take away the land on which we stand. Lafti Lafe Kenya. That's the statement the Oromo made, that the land is our life, our bone, our core, and you cannot alienate me from my land. That's the idea. And so when it came to take the land, then it's the end of the story. They said, this is it. We can put up with any kind of operation. You can put up with any kind of sleight of hand, political sleight of hand, but once you take away the ground I'm standing on, then I can't put up with anything. There is no way I can go. In fact, it's very, very sad that when the students protest nowadays, they say, where shall we go? Esadim, where shall we go from our land? That's the question. So So this is a very intense moment now. Students are demanding aggressively, and the government is reacting aggressively, militarily, of course. And the true image of the Oromo and the true image of the government came out. The image of the Oromo as a terrorist that has to be controlled and securitized. It is the military that is now actually deployed to control the Oromo people. The military is supposed to look outside to defend the country from others, but the military, the special forces, the federal police in the region, they are actually putting on a raid. And to my knowledge, up until I came this afternoon, there were about 10 young people who were killed brutally, and are now in the hundreds that are injured, and many people, of course, detained. Now, if this is the situation, now it started with the students, now it has become a popular unrest. In fact, somebody was contemplating yesterday that this has moved away from protest to movement. Once this is a movement, we can't tell what is going to happen now. The simple message the Oromos are giving, and the OFC also is giving yesterday, a few days ago, the Oromo are giving is stop the master plan. Back off from the land. Do not repress the students. And continue classes in the university. The universities are closed now. Disarm the territory, because there is a huge deployment of military and their arsenals. Pull out those things. Bring back calm into the region. And then listen to the people. And rework whatever development plan you have in such a way that it also participates in the people. But otherwise, it is an expression of resentment of last year's election. Last year, when the election happened, I was running a series of articles on what this election means to different sectors of Ethiopian peoples, and what does it mean to the Oromo. To the Oromo, the election was a war by other means. The government, interestingly, claimed 100% of the electoral seats. It has won 100%. If it had won 100% of the electoral seats, what is just happening now then? Why is it that a government that has got that level of mandate is suddenly rejected altogether by paying lives and limbs by young people, children, old people, farmers? How is it that the government that just secured their votes is resisting them at this level? And this is the irony of history. And probably this will be the moment of the making or the breaking of this regime. And if it is a civilized regime, will come to its senses and back off and apologize and make sure that the perpetrators of all the atrocities are brought to justice. To date, there was no commission of inquiry established either in Oromia or in the federal government house to look into this matter. And no government actually came forward to give any explanation about what is happening. So from the look of it, they are going to go the military way. And the military way is not going to contain the Oromo at this point in time. And if this continues, well, who knows? Other people who have their own misgivings and disappointments, such as the Amhara, will join the Oromo, as trends are showing in the social media now. The Amhara are actually coming around to support the Oromo. If this is gonna create a coalition of opposition to the government on the ground, not political now, mass opposition, then this could be the breaking moment for the regime. And this could as well be a revolution that the Oromos, for the first time, unleashed in Ethiopia. And perhaps this time they are going to be heard. Twice revolutions have happened in Ethiopia in their name, but because they weren't subjects, they weren't heard. This might be the moment when Oromos make history in Ethiopia and change the country and transform it. And as someone was saying this morning, they say in America, as California goes, where California goes, the nation goes. And probably this time, where Oromia goes, Ethiopia goes. Who knows?
Thank you very much, Rajesh.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there.
Right. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.